The battlefield lies silent, yet the ground still breathes with the memory of war. Blood seeps into the soil, mingling with the fallen leaves of autumn. In the distance, the moon hangs pale and cold, reflecting its light upon a single blade of steel. The katana, polished to perfection, sharp enough to split a strand of hair and heavy with the weight of centuries. And there, standing motionless against the night wind, is a warrior. His armor is dented, his crimson sash torn, his breath steady despite the wounds that mark his body. He does not tremble before death. He bows to it. For in his world, to live without honor is a fate worse than the grave. This is the way of the samurai, a path not carved by victory nor by survival, but by devotion to an unbreakable code. Bushido, the way of the warrior. The samurai were not born into peace. They were forged in fire, a fire of endless wars between rival clans, when Japan was divided into fiefdoms ruled by powerful lords known as daimyo. In this fractured world, loyalty was life itself. And for the samurai, loyalty was not just a duty, but a destiny. Imagine standing where they stood. Every dawn, you polish your blade not just for combat, but as a ritual of the soul. Every night, you recite the lessons of duty, knowing that tomorrow may demand your blood. You live with death as a constant companion, walking side by side with the inevitable. The katana you carry is no ordinary weapon. To the samurai, it is kokoro no kagami, the mirror of the soul. Forged by fire and folded steel, it is said to contain the spirit of its wielder. The swordsmith's hammer does not merely shape metal, it shapes the warrior's fate. Each strike echoes with discipline, with patience, with the demand for perfection. And yet, beneath the beauty of the blade lies a truth both terrifying and profound. The katana is not meant to rest in silence. It thirsts for purpose, and in the age of war, its purpose was blood. But what is it that drives a man to raise his sword not in anger, but in honor? What makes him kneel before his master and vow, "Your life is mine to protect. My life is yours to command"? The answer is Bushido. Bushido is more than a code. It is a philosophy, a spiritual compass. It demands courage without hesitation, loyalty without question, and death without fear. To embrace Bushido is to abandon the self, to dissolve one's existence into something greater, the duty owed to one's lord, one's clan, one's people. But Bushido is not without its paradox, for in the pursuit of honor, the samurai walked hand in hand with tragedy. Their stories are drenched not only in glory but also in sorrow. They found beauty in the fleeting nature of life, like cherry blossoms falling at the height of their bloom, perfect and gone too soon. Listen closely to the silence after battle, and you can almost hear their voices, the cries of men charging into impossible odds, the whispers of loyalty sworn before dawn, the quiet exhale of a warrior plunging his own blade into his chest, choosing death by seppuku over the shame of defeat. These are not tales of madness. They are echoes of a world where the line between life and death was as thin as the edge of a katana. Tonight, we step into that world. We will walk the blood-soaked roads of medieval Japan. We will kneel in the shadow of lords who held the fate of nations in their hands. We will lift the sword with those who lived and died by its weight. From the rise of the daimyo to the twilight of the Tokugawa shogunate, from the clashing armies of Sekigahara to the lone ronin wandering in exile, this is the story of the samurai. A story of steel and spirit, of duty and death, of men who chose to live not as mere mortals, but as warriors bound by an eternal oath. And so we begin, with a single question that defined an entire class of men. What is the worth of a life when honor demands everything? Before there were samurai, there was chaos. Japan, the land of mountains and rivers, of cherry blossoms and storms, was not always the serene empire we imagine today. For centuries, it was fractured into countless domains, each ruled by a daimyo, a feudal lord whose power was carved by the sword. The emperor sat in Kyoto, a distant figure, more divine symbol than ruler. Real power flowed through the hands of the shogun, and beneath him, the great daimyo who commanded armies of men. But where power is divided, ambition festers. And so Japan became a land not of peace, but of endless war. From the 12th century onward, rival clans clashed in battles that stained the earth red. The Genpei War, fought between the Taira and Minamoto clans, marked the beginning of a new order, the birth of the samurai as the ruling class. Out of this conflict rose the first shogunate, the Kamakura shogunate, and with it, the age of the warrior. Imagine the world of that time. Villages burned, fields trampled, lives shattered by the march of soldiers. For common farmers, survival meant submission. For the daimyo, survival meant dominance. And for the men who stood between the samurai, survival meant nothing at all. Their purpose was not to live, but to serve. It was in this crucible of blood and betrayal that the identity of the samurai was forged. Unlike mercenaries, they were not simply hired swords. Unlike knights of Europe, they were not bound by religion alone. The samurai were bound by a code unwritten at first, but etched into their souls. Loyalty unto death. Their lord's honor was their honor. His defeat was their disgrace. His death was their end. This loyalty gave the daimyo power beyond measure. For an army of men who feared dishonor more than death was a weapon stronger than any steel. But loyalty alone cannot sustain a class. The samurai were more than fighters. They were administrators, governors, and keepers of order. In time of peace, they collected taxes, enforced laws, and lived as the backbone of the feudal hierarchy. In time of war, they donned their armor, tightened the cords of their helmets, and mounted their horses, ready to bleed for their clan. Still, behind every order, behind every clash of spears and arrows, loomed one question. What does it mean to be a warrior? For the samurai, the answer was found not only on the battlefield, but in philosophy, in ritual, in a way of life that transcended violence. As Japan's civil wars dragged on, their identity sharpened. The katana became their symbol, the bow their tradition, the horse their companion, and Bushido, the way of the warrior, their creed. The Sengoku period, the age of warring states in the 15th and 16th centuries, brought this question to its fiercest trial. Rival daimyo fought for supremacy. Entire provinces were consumed in war, and the land echoed with the thunder of armies. This was the world that produced legends Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Tokugawa Ieyasu, men who would shape the destiny of Japan itself. But even the mightiest warlord was nothing without the men who carried his banners into battle. And so the samurai became both sword and shield, both enforcer and martyr. Their lives were fragile, yet their spirit was unyielding. This is the paradox of feudal Japan, a land of fleeting beauty, where cherry blossoms bloom for only a moment, yet a land where men were expected to live and die as though their duty were eternal. The rise of the samurai was not inevitable. It was the answer to chaos, the price of survival in a fractured land. To understand the samurai is to understand the Japan that created them, a Japan torn apart by ambition, yet bound together by the iron thread of loyalty. As we stand at the gates of this history, one truth becomes clear. The samurai did not seek peace, they sought order, and through the sharp edge of their swords, they carved a path that would define Japan for centuries. Now, to understand their soul, we must first understand the symbol they carried, the weapon that was more than metal, more than death, more than life itself, the katana. There are weapons, and then there is the katana, forged not only by fire and steel, but by centuries of devotion. The katana was more than a tool of war. It was a mirror of the soul, a vessel of honor, a silent companion that spoke louder than any words. To hold a katana was to hold history itself. A single blade carried the weight of generations, the wisdom of swordsmiths who spent their entire lives perfecting an art that could never truly be perfected. They folded the steel again and again, layer upon layer, as if binding the spirit of the warrior into the blade. Each strike of the hammer was deliberate, each spark a reminder that perfection required suffering. The samurai did not see their sword as property. They saw it as an extension of their being. When they reached for the hilt, it was not anger that guided them, but duty. When they drew the blade, it was not for bloodlust, but for justice as defined by their code. The beauty of the katana lies in its paradox. It is slender, elegant, and curved, a work of art polished until it gleams like liquid moonlight. And yet, it was made for a single, devastating purpose: to cut, to end life with a stroke as swift as falling petals. In this paradox, the samurai found their truth. Life is fleeting, delicate, and fragile, like the cherry blossom. And yet it can be severed in an instant. To live with this awareness was to embrace the impermanence of all things, the very heart of Bushido. Consider the rituals that surrounded the katana. When a young samurai came of age, he was gifted a pair of swords, the daisho, a long katana and a shorter wakizashi. Together, they symbolized his readiness not only to defend his lord, but also to end his own life if honor demanded it. The wakizashi was the blade of seppuku, the ritual suicide that allowed a warrior to die with dignity rather than live with shame. The katana was worn edge up, ready to be drawn in a single motion. Every detail, from the wrapping of the hilt to the curvature of the blade, was designed for precision. To master the katana was not simply to master a weapon, it was to master oneself. For every cut required clarity, every strike demanded calm. A mind clouded by rage would falter. A spirit unbalanced would fail. Sword schools emerged across Japan, each teaching not only technique, but philosophy. The legendary Miyamoto Musashi, author of The Book of Five Rings, declared that the way of the sword was the way of strategy itself. To study the katana was to study life, death, timing, and intention. Victory was not in brute force, but in harmony. Harmony between the body, the mind, and the steel in one's hand. And yet, the sword was not always in motion. Many samurai believed that the greatest cut was the one never made. Restraint was power. To know when to sheath the blade was as important as knowing when to strike. For a samurai, mercy and discipline were not signs of weakness, but of mastery. But the katana was also a constant reminder. A reminder that the warrior's life was never his own. The blade belonged to the code, to his clan, to his lord. A samurai could be stripped of his land, his title, even his family, but to take his sword was to strip him of his very identity. Without his blade, he was nothing. Thus, the katana was both gift and burden. It demanded sacrifice. It whispered of mortality, and in its silence, it asked a single question: will you be worthy of me? Picture this: a battlefield at dawn. Mist clings to the ground. Two armies stand ready, banners flapping in the cold wind. Amid the clash of drums and horns, a samurai kneels, unsheathes his katana, and holds it before him. He sees not only the reflection of his face and its surface, but the reflection of his duty, his lineage, his destiny. When he rises, blade in hand, he does not rise as one man. He rises as the embodiment of centuries. He rises as Bushido made flesh. The katana was feared by enemies, revered by allies, and cherished by its master. Even today, its design remains unrivaled. Historians call it one of the most perfect killing weapons ever made. But to the samurai, it was not perfection in death, it was perfection in discipline, in balance, in spirit. It was their soul. And so, in the curved steel of the katana, we glimpse the essence of the samurai. Artistry wedded to violence. Honor forged in fire. Life sharpened by the certainty of death. The sword was never just a weapon. It was a teacher, and its lessons would echo through the centuries. The smoke of Sekigahara may have cleared, but what remained was not just victory or defeat. What remained was a question. Why did men choose death over life? The answer lies in Bushido, the way of the warrior. To the samurai, honor was not an ornament. It was their very breath. A man could lose his sword, his land, even his life, and yet remain a samurai. But once he lost his honor, he ceased to exist. Honor was invisible, yet heavier than armor. It was the unspoken law that governed every gesture, every word, every cut of the blade. To insult a samurai was to wound him deeper than any steel. To betray a promise was to disgrace not only himself but his clan, his ancestors, his descendants. That is why, in moments when defeat threatened humiliation, there was but one path left: seppuku. Ritual death was not despair. It was redemption. By opening his body to the blade, a warrior closed his life with dignity intact. His blood became the ink that preserved his name. But honor alone could not sustain the weight of their existence. The life of a samurai was bound to his lord like steel links in an unbreakable chain. To disobey a command was unthinkable. A man's worth was measured not by his victories but by his obedience. If his daimyo ordered him to fight against impossible odds, he fought. If his daimyo ordered him to die, he died. This loyalty was not blind. It was sacred. It turned individuals into instruments of something greater. In service, they found meaning. In devotion, they found identity. And yet this same loyalty could twist into tragedy. Sekigahara showed it mercilessly. Some betrayed for ambition, others perished for faithfulness. Loyalty could elevate a man into legend or bury him in obscurity. But either way, the code demanded it. And above all, there was death. Most men feared it. The samurai prepared for it. From the moment they first held a sword, they were taught to meditate on their own mortality, to wake each day imagining themselves already dead. It was not despair, but liberation. For a man who accepts death has nothing left to fear. In Bushido, death was not the enemy. Cowardice was. To die with honor was to achieve immortality of the spirit. To cling to life at the cost of shame was to live as a ghost. And so death became their final teacher. Every duel, every campaign, every decision was made under its shadow. The katana was not simply a weapon, but a reminder that life is fragile, fleeting, and therefore sacred. Here lies the paradox of their existence. Men who embraced compassion yet wielded instruments of death, who valued honesty yet moved in courts full of deceit, who worshipped honor yet were so often betrayed. Still, they endured, because Bushido was not about perfection but about the attempt, the striving to live with integrity in a world drowned in blood. The true legacy of Bushido was not in the battles it won, but in the values it left behind. Honor, loyalty, courage, honesty, benevolence, respect, self-control, these virtues transcended war. They shaped Japan's culture, its art, its philosophy. Even today, echoes of Bushido remain, in the quiet discipline of the worker, in the solemnity of rituals, in the resilience of ordinary people who face hardship with calm resolve. Bushido taught that life is short, but how you live and how you die gives it weight. So when we ask, why did the samurai choose death over life? The answer is simple yet profound. Because to them, life without honor was already death. Bushido was never a book gathering dust on a shelf, never a creed recited only in temples. It was lived, moment by moment, choice by choice, sacrifice by sacrifice. Every warrior carried it not only in his mind but in his veins. Every katana carried it not only in its steel but in the hands that drew it. Every act of seppuku, every fall in battle, was a line written in the eternal scripture of Bushido. It was both burden and blessing. It asked everything and gave nothing in return but meaning. To follow it was to walk a narrow path between light and shadow, a path where honor gleamed brighter than life itself, and where death whispered not of defeat but of fulfillment. This was the soul of the samurai, forged not in peace but in fire. When we look back upon the long shadows of the samurai, we do not merely see warriors drenched in blood in battle. We see philosophers in armor, men who turned the art of killing into the art of living. Theirs was not a life of indulgence, nor of comfort, nor even of peace. Theirs was a life sharpened like the edge of a blade, every moment demanding awareness, every action weighed against honor. The paradox of the samurai is that they lived most intensely because they accepted death most fully. In a world where any sunrise might be their last, they learned to walk with calmness, to bow to the inevitable, and to meet fate with steady eyes. It is here that the true essence of Bushido reveals itself. To live rightly is already to be prepared to die. We often imagine the samurai as figures locked in perpetual combat, their swords flashing beneath banners and storm clouds. And yet, their greatest victories were not always on the battlefield. Their greatest victories were within. To conquer the self, to tame fear, to discipline desire, to silence the trembling of the heart was a triumph no enemy could ever take away. This is why the katana was not just a weapon, it was a mirror. It reflected back not only the face of the warrior, but the truth of his spirit. A hand guided by anger would falter. A mind clouded by greed would fail. Only the one who entered combat with a pure heart could strike with precision. In this way, the blade demanded integrity, demanded self-mastery, demanded that every cut be not only an act of war but an act of philosophy. Bushido, too, was never about brutality. It was about clarity. It taught the samurai that strength without compassion is savagery, that courage without loyalty is chaos, that life without honor is emptiness. In these lessons we find not just a manual for warriors, but a philosophy for humanity. Think of the cherry blossom, that fragile flower so cherished in Japan. It blooms brilliantly, briefly, and falls at the height of its beauty. For the samurai, this was the perfect symbol of life itself. To fall with grace at one's peak was not a tragedy, but a fulfillment. Death was not the end. It was the completion of a design as natural as the falling of petals. And so the samurai lived not clinging to years, but to moments. Each bow, each word, each cut of the sword carried the weight of eternity. They knew that history would not remember how long they lived, but how well. They sought not survival, but significance. What makes the story of the samurai endure is not the violence they unleashed, but the silence they left behind, the silence of a code lived so fiercely that even centuries later, Hitseko remain. In the calm determination of a craftsman, in the unwavering loyalty of a friend, in the quiet courage of those who face hardship with dignity there. Still, we find the spirit of Bushido. To call the samurai merely warriors is to misunderstand them. They were guardians of a philosophy, keepers of an eternal fire. They walked the narrow path between destruction and discipline, between chaos and order. And in walking it, they taught us something vital, that true power lies not in domination, but in self-mastery, not in the fear we inspire, but in the honor we embody. So what do we learn from their story? That life is fragile, and death is certain. But within that certainty lies freedom, the freedom to live with courage, to stand by our word, to choose integrity over convenience, honor over survival. This is why the samurai were more than men of the sword. They were men of the soul. When the wind rustles through the pines, when cherry blossoms drift silently to the ground, when the moonlight glints on steel, their spirit still whispers, "Live with honor, die without fear, and let your life be a blade sharpened against eternity." The battlefield is long abandoned now. Grass grows where once rivers of blood ran. The banners of daimyo have rotted into the soil, their colors lost to the wind. The cries of men have faded, leaving only silence, broken by the whisper of leaves in the evening breeze. Yet, amid this quiet, one image remains. A katana thrust into the earth, its steel catching the last light of the setting Sunday. This sword does not belong to a single man. It belongs to all who lived and died by its edge. It is a grave marker for thousands, a monument to loyalty and sacrifice, a silent testimony to a code that demanded everything and left nothing behind but meaning. The samurai may have vanished as a class, their armor displayed in museums, their castles reduced to stone and memory, but their spirit has never left. The discipline that carried them through war, The calm that carried them to death, the honor that carried them beyond time, these remain like invisible threads woven into the fabric of Japan, and perhaps into the very fabric of humanity itself. For what is Bushido, if not a reminder to live with purpose? To carry ourselves as if every word we speak and every act we take might be our last? To bow not only to lords and masters, but to life itself, with humility and gratitude? In the end, the samurai were not merely keepers of the sword. They were keepers of a truth we too often forget, that the measure of a man is not found in what he conquers, but in what he refuses to betray. Look again at the katana in the ground. Around it, the field is quiet. But listen closely, and you may still hear the echo of a vow that once bound men more tightly than chains, a vow whispered in the darkness of tents before dawn, shouted in the fury of battle, and honored in the stillness of death. I will live with honor. I will die with honor. And even if the world forgets my name, it will not forget my code. That is the oath of Bushido. That is the legacy of the samurai. And though the sword rests now, its silence is not the silence of extinction. It is the silence of endurance. A silence that waits, patient as steel, for those who dare to listen. Perhaps you and I are not called to carry a katana into battle, but we are called to carry something heavier, the weight of our own choices, to walk through life as if watched by the eyes of those who came before, to remember that honor is not an ancient relic, but a living fire, to stand ready, even in the face of fear, and say, I will not falter, for in the end, the samurai did not teach us how to fight. They taught us how to live. They taught us how to face the certainty of death with a spirit unbroken. And they taught us that beyond all the noise of history, one truth remains eternal. The blade may rust, but the vow endures. So let the katana stand, rooted in earth and memory. Let it gleam beneath the sky as the last witness to an age when men gave their lives to something greater than themselves. And let its silent presence remind us, again and again, that Bushido is not gone. It lives in every act of loyalty, in every moment of courage, in every life lived with dignity. If you close your eyes, you may see them still, the warriors who bowed to death and rose into legend. Their footsteps echo through time, not as conquerors, but as guardians of an eternal truth. And if you listen closely enough, the wind will carry their final whisper. Live with honor. Die without fear. This is the way of the sword.